What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Hoops Hub, talking all things basketball. And today we got some stuff to talk about, specifically Mr. John Morant, the All-Star point guard. Memphis looking to trade the man who made this team relevant again for the last 5 seasons or so, former number 2 overall pick. And look, we just saw Trae Young get traded from the Atlanta Hawks for pennies on the dollar for CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert. So the point guard market right now, it's safe to say, is not very lucrative. Not a lot of teams are desperate to trade, their whole bench or their future draft stock for a point guard, especially a point guard like John Morant, who is not the world's greatest jump shooter. He hasn't been as aggressive getting to the paint as he has been in year past. In his 2 All-Star seasons, John Morant averaged close to 1 dunk per game. Right now, he's averaging a dunk about every 3 games or so. I think he's averaging 0.39 dunks per game, something like that. So he's not as aggressive in what used to be his go-to play style. He's settling for more mid-ranges, and the shooting numbers have suffered because of that. Now, granted, like I said, Trae Young just got traded for not much, so not many teams are going to be desperate for a player like John Morant. But there's still some teams out there that I think can really benefit from a John Morant trade, especially at the price you can get him at right now. So that's what today's video is all about. We're checking out some potential John Morant trade packages because as soon as a star player gets tweeted about in potentially being listed in trade packages, the whole NBA world is going to start creating their own trade packages, see what works financially and logistically, and that's what we're diving into today. Let's check out some potential John Morant trade packages, and I'll let you know what I think about the teams that may be trying to get him and if they're getting good deals. So, yeah, trading John Morant and getting a decent deal back if you're the Memphis Grizzlies is not going to be easy. But, there are some things that go in their favor. Like there was the whole issue at the beginning of the season with Ja getting suspended for a game due to conduct detrimental to the team. Usually when that happens, it just means we want to trade this guy and he's become a distraction. Which, for the Memphis Grizzlies kind of makes sense. I mean, you've got a lot of young talent that you can rebuild around. The Ja and Jaren Jackson led Memphis Grizzlies, they were fun for a few years, but I think the Grizzlies are understanding they're not winning a championship with those two as their best players. Maybe they want to hold on to Jaren Jackson for the defensive purposes, but John Morant doesn't bring them what they need right now. And they have guys like Jalen Wells, Cedric Howard, G.G. Jackson, Scottie Pippen Jr., plenty of other young players who are ready to step up and take on that role. So if Morant isn't helping out the team and they don't want Morant to play, a trade just becomes that much more likely. And the thing that hurts them is that Ja is having the worst season of his career statistically. See here, he's down to under 20 points per game. He's averaging career lows in minutes, in shooting numbers, in rebounds, assists. So, yeah, Ja is not necessarily having his best year. But there's still teams that I think will want to trade for him because of the potential that he has. You've seen what he can do when he wants to be out there and wants to play. For whatever team that does trade for John Morant too, the financial side of things are a little bit easier because of the fact that, one, he's got 3 years left on his contract. If you don't want to extend him next year, okay, you can flip him still. You can see what this experiment looks like for a little bit and then decide, all right, do we want to extend this guy? Do we want to cut our losses, say, you know what? We tried it. It didn't work. Let's move on. So you got 3 years to see how this whole John Morant experiment works. And then you can extend him to a 3-year, $178 million deal next summer. And that really isn't, that's a lot of money. But in the grand scheme of things in the NBA, if Ja works out wherever he gets traded to and becomes an all-star player again, that's a pretty cheap deal for an all-star caliber point guard. But again, the problem with Ja is availability. This is going to be his third straight year playing less than 60 games, and a lot of teams don't want to spend too much on a risk like that. As we saw with the Hawks and Trae Young, a lot of teams don't need point guards either. And just looking at some of these potential teams they have here, the Timberwolves are a great team. They desperately need a point guard. They don't have the draft capital to trade for a Ja Morant, so they would have to, as you can see here, they'd have to send out at least 3 players because of the fact that they're over the first apron. They can't take on more salary in a trade than they're giving away. So for the Timberwolves, it'll be a little bit more difficult to trade for a Ja Morant. Same with the Phoenix Suns. Then you have teams like the Brooklyn Nets, Sacramento Kings, who, look, I get it. They have the draft capital and the flexibility to make the money work. But why would they trade for a Ja Morant unless they're planning on building around him for the next few years? I mean, I could see it. The Wizards just traded for Trae Young, which nobody really expected. Why would a non-contender trade for an all-star caliber player? Well, maybe they see him as the future of that team. And the Nets and Kings, both also needing point guards, could make sense, but again, it doesn't really fit their timeline. They're young teams. They're not looking to win next year. I don't see that happening. Here's the potential trade offers ESPN has. Starting with my Miami Heat. Heat get Ja Morant. Grizzlies get Tyler Hero and Simone Fontecchio. If I'm the Miami Heat, I'd do this deal in a heartbeat. You're really not trading away that much. Fontecchio was great, but you got him in a sign-in trade for Duncan Robinson. He was a great shooter at the start of the season. Kind of fell off since then. Doesn't bring you much else besides average defense and finishing ability. And Tyler Hero, I'm a big Tyler Hero guy. I have defended Tyler Hero since the day he got drafted to Miami. I've really wanted it to work out with Tyler Hero being one of the lead guys on a championship Heat team. Hasn't worked out. He was an all-star last year. He has shown flashes, but his defense is certainly a liability. He gets blown by at one of the most frequent rates in the NBA. And, I feel like a swap, a Tyler Hero for Ja Morant, is pretty even. Ja Morant gives you plenty of potential, but also plays that point guard position. With Tyler Hero, since coming back and the Heat making the trade for Norman Powell, look, it's fair to say that the offense just hasn't clicked the same way you might have expected it once to. So you get Ja Morant, pair him, and again, the Heat aren't really giving much up in this deal. Ja kind of replaces Tyler Hero right away. Fontecchio, I don't think you're too worried about replacing his bench impact. So yeah, the Heat could very well run a lineup of Ja Morant, Norman Powell, Andrew Wiggins, and then if Eric Spoelstra decides to go double big and go Bam and Khalil Ware, you could start maybe Davion and slide Ja to the 2, which I don't necessarily see them doing, but I mean that would be the starting lineup if I were Eric Spoelstra and the Miami Heat make this trade. And I think that's a really good starting 5. If Ja Morant gets back to motivated basketball and gets back to playing at an all-star level, and you have bigs who can space the floor for that drive and kick action, I think Ja Morant to Miami makes a lot of sense. But that might be Heedle bias coming out. So let's see what else we got here. Milwaukee Bucks for Kyle Kuzma, Kevin Porter Jr., 2026 first, and the Pistons get Gary Harris and cash considerations. Okay, I could see the Bucks doing this as well. You're really not giving much up. Kuzma, I don't know why they traded for Kuzma in the first place. I get Chris Middleton was at the back end of his career, but Kuzma hasn't brought you much. Kevin Porter Jr., inconsistent. A 2026 first. I mean, I think if you're the Bucks, you got to make this deal. Will the Grizzlies take only Kyle Kuzma, Kevin Porter Jr., and a 2026 first swap for Ja Morant? That's the bigger question for me with this deal. I think with the Miami Heat deal, they can convince themselves, okay, we're getting an all-star guard back. When Tyler Hero's healthy, he is a 20-plus points per game scorer. And, yeah, could very well see the Grizzlies seeing this trade package and going, what do we get out of this? I mean, Kuzma and Kevin Porter Jr. are fine players, but they're not going to replace John Morant's impact. A 2026 first swap, I I guess if they really value draft capital, this might be a trade that they consider. But if they really, and I mean really want draft capital, they would work out a trade with the Sacramento Kings or the Brooklyn Nets, teams who have multiple first round picks to trade for a point guard. But again, the point guard market is kind of saturated right now. Not a lot of teams are desperate to trade for an all-star point guard, especially if it's one that is having a down year. I mean, if I'm Giannis Antetokounmpo, I'm all for this deal. You know, if I'm Giannis, he's come out and said that he doesn't want to request a trade out of Milwaukee. He's not that kind of guy. Cool, awesome, much respect. But I'd be in the front office saying this is a deal that you need to get done. You know, the spacing is a little bit of a concern because Ja and Giannis are not the most consistent three-point shooters, and really, your only shooter surrounding them is AJ Green, and I mean Ryan Rollins can shoot it from deep, but in the pick and roll, Ja Morant and Giannis Antetokounmpo with their finishing ability, that's a very scary thought of trying to figure out how you're going to guard that because, you know, as a big man, you hedge towards Giannis and Ja has a wide open lane and he certainly still has the explosiveness to get up and finish at the rim. I just think he's not doing it in Memphis this season because of the, you know, off the court issues with the coaching staff and whatnot. And then as a big, you shade a little bit over to Ja Morant. You're giving Giannis an open lane that maybe they could get a lob off or something. Yeah, this would be a pretty scary thing to see Ja Morant and Giannis Antetokounmpo running the pick and roll. But you know, I feel like if I'm the Memphis Grizzlies, I'm still taking the Miami Heat deal over this one because you can at least say to yourself, all right, we're getting an all-star guard back. You might not get the first round pick, but you're getting an all-star guard that maybe you can build something around. Moving on. Toronto Raptors get Ja Morant. The Grizzlies get quickly Ochai Agbaji and a 2026 lottery protected first. I'm going to come out right now and say that first round pick probably not worth it. The Raptors, I mean, yes, the Grizzlies probably get that pick because I do think the Raptors are going to be a playoff team this year. They honestly have surprised me quite a bit. And they're in a position where, all right, Brandon Ingram is, you know, obviously not on the trade market, so you got to build around him. And I mean, Emmanuel quickly, he's, you know, he was a decent get back for OG Anunoby, but hasn't really developed into the starting point guard you would have liked. Agbaji's still very young, has a lot. I mean, how old is Agbaji? He's only 25 years old. So still a lot of potential there with Agbaji. I mean, when he was at Kansas, he was certainly one of the most sought after players in the draft. So a lot of potential there. You know, looking at this deal, I think it makes sense for the Raptors. You know, this is the first time in a few years the Raptors have had real sustainable success throughout the first half of the season or so. So now would be the time to make a splash and trade for an all-star guard. And I don't think you're losing much in quickly Agbaji and, you know, a lottery protected pick. Hey, if it doesn't work out, Raptors miss the playoffs, you still get that pick back. Now, I'm not sure if it says here, I'm sure that if that pick does end up being protected, maybe Memphis would then receive an unprotected pick in 2027. It doesn't necessarily say here, but I could very well see that happening. And you know what? The 2026 NBA draft is pretty stacked. Even outside the top 5, I think, are generational potential talents, but there's a lot of really good players in this draft. So even if you do end up with a non-lottery first-round pick, there's some decent players you can get from that bunch. Finally, the Minnesota Timberwolves trading Rob Dillingham, Naz Reid, and a 2027 second-rounder via the Bulls to the Memphis Grizzlies. The Wizards end up with Terrence Shannon Jr., and the Utah Jazz get Mike Conley and Cash. Okay. You know what? I think right now, out of the 4 deals in this article, this and the Miami Heat trade, I think, are the most likely. Because again, with this deal, if you're the Memphis Grizzlies, Rob Dillingham, a lot of potential. Let's see, how old is Rob Dillingham? He's only 21 years old. 8th overall pick just 2 years ago. So you're getting a lot of potential in Rob Dillingham. Naz Reid, great stretch big. Um, I I think the rebounding would certainly need some fine tuning with both Naz Reid and Jaren Jackson. Like, we've seen the memes, we know Jaren Jackson doesn't rebound the best. 6 rebounds a game at 6'9" for Naz Reid. I mean, not bad. If you're the Grizzlies, you would probably like that to be a little bit better if one of those guys is your starting center. But I mean, again, they do have Zach Edey that they could bring in off the bench for height. But if you're the Timberwolves, how do you replace Naz Reid's production off the bench? Because this is not gutting a roster by any means, but this is a decent amount to give up because the Timberwolves don't have the the draft capital, excuse me. But I think this is certainly a good deal for a lot of sides. I mean, the Wizards, they end up with Terrence Shannon, who, again, just like Rob Dillingham, very young, a lot of potential. Wizards building around Trae Young. They have a lot of young pieces already. Add in Terrence Shannon. That's another young piece they could try to trade for a disgruntled star in the offseason to pair with Trae Young. And I think the Grizzlies get a decent deal out of this with Naz Reid as well. He's, like I said, he's a great stretch big. Again, like I said, the rebounding might need some fine tuning, but that's a pretty solid defensive and stretch 4-5 man with Naz Reid and Jaren Jackson, whoever you decide to play at the 4 and the 5. Both of those guys, I think, spread the floor very well. And you know what? Even for Mike Conley, send him back to Utah. He spent a good few years there with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, and obviously things not really panning out in Minnesota. Mike Conley, he's at the tail end of his career. I'm sure he's probably going to be a buyout if this trade ended up going through. I would see Mike Conley probably wanting to sign like a vet minimum with a contending team. I don't think he'd want to end his career with the Utah Jazz in a rebuilding season, but again, you never know. Maybe he would enjoy playing in a place where he's played so many years before going to Minnesota. So I think this is a really good deal as well. If I'm the Memphis Grizzlies, I'd say I'm between this and the Miami Heat deal. Obviously, you guys know I'm in favor of the Miami Heat deal. I would like to see Miami make a splash. They're not contending for a championship with this roster. They're not going to tank. So at least try to make a move. And again, Tyler Hero and Simone Fontecchio for Ja Morant. Not a bad deal at all on either side of things. This deal with the Timberwolves also pretty solid. And who knows? Again, if the Grizzlies really value the draft capital, maybe they do go with the Milwaukee Bucks potential offer and get that 2026 first round pick swap. Maybe they do go with the Toronto Raptors deal and get that lottery protected 2026 first round pick. So we'll see. Either way, the point guard market is not as lucrative as it's been in years past, and Ja Morant is likely going to be traded before the trade deadline in February. Where to? We're still yet to find out, but when we do, we'll react to it right here on the Hoops Hub. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let us know down in the comments where you want to see Ja Morant go, and any other stars that you think might be on the trade block this season. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one. Make sure you like and subscribe. We'll be back very shortly. Peace.